Welcome to the meeting of the Committee on Academic Excellence and Research. I first want to welcome our members. Nancy is not here today. She will be muchly missed. That is my vice chair. Laurie Bricker is here, Elaine Mendoza, Paul Foster, and I think Joe's supposed to be here. Have we heard anything from him?
No.
Okay, we hope he will arrive shortly. We don't have any other board members attending today. I also want to introduce to you Commissioner Paredes, a man who needs no introduction. I came in this morning calling him the boss man, and he did not want that title, as he's still riddled from the wounds of the legislature. He's trying to hide out. Our Deputy Commissioner, David Gardner, is also with us, and everybody knows Joe. We're so glad to have all of you here, and I want to remind you that this is a live broadcast, and here's our new camera right up here with the red light on. Is that telling us we're actually not on? Because it was kind of yellow before.
Yes. You're not on right now.
We're not on. So, hello, even though we're not there. Or goodbye, even though we're not there. This is where our internet audience normally views in. So we're having, there we go. So we are on our webcast. So welcome to our audience that's watching us over the internet. We have a full agenda this morning. We will try to get through this as quickly as possible because we also have a conference that the coordinating board is sponsoring this afternoon that begins around noon. So we're going to try to get out of here in time for that. The first real item on our agenda is my committee chair's report, and I have a few things to announce to y'all that have occurred since our last meeting. I attended the May 29th meeting of Participation and Success Committee, which addressed progress on the college readiness initiatives. The course redesign project that has been in our committee's area and is a principal focus of ours in college readiness continues to lead the implementation efforts. And I'll kind of quickly go through what those course redesigns are and which schools have them to remind everybody and give you kind of an update of what's happening there. Composition 1, redesigned by Texas Tech and the Dallas County Community College District LaCroix Center. U.S. History 1 being redesigned by the University of North Texas, and Calculus 1 redesigned by the UT Telecampus. They're the first courses in this project. I'm very pleased to report to you that all three courses are on track to be offered this fall, which is great that we're actually going to meet our deadline, and that was mandated by the original legislation. Phase 2 funded 5 fast-track projects starting in April to redesign an accelerated first-year Spanish course at Texas Tech, a standard beginning Spanish course at Austin Community College, an expository writing course at UTEP, and a college algebra course at Del Mar College. Also funded was a UNT online repository for instructional materials developed as part of this project. RFPs for Phase 3 are due to the coordinating board on June 29th, so that deadline rapidly approaches. Staff expects to receive more than 30 proposals for review. Have we gotten a lot thus far?
None thus far, but we know a lot of them are working on it.
But we will by the 29th.
We expect them all to come in about 4 o'clock on the 29th.
Okay, that's the norm, isn't it? These awards will be made at our July 19th coordinating board meeting for funding running through the next 2 years. An RFP for Phase 4 redesign projects is now being prepared. We plan for that RFP to be posted soon after our July meeting. Reviewed later this fall and awards announced as early as January 2008 full coordinating board meeting. Other recent activities include staff review and recommendations for action on a number of new program proposals and preparation of rules for the legislative session, of which there are many. We'll see those rules for proposed action at our July meeting. Our staff continues to work on those. That concludes my committee chair's report, and our next item on the agenda is item 3, discussion of guidelines for instructional programs for workforce education, and Joe Stafford will explain that to us. Joe?
Well, I'm actually going to hand off most of that to Dr. Couch, who's the department head that's been working mostly with it. The GIPWE is a 200-page or so guideline, and you can imagine when that gets sent out for comment that we get some comments back. So.
Indeed. I'll be very brief. Good morning.
Good morning.
We revise the GIPWE periodically to take advantage of the opportunity to tune it up, to make it more consistent with what needs to be done, and to take into account changes that have come about since the previous revision. In the process of doing that this time, there was a great deal of discussion at the staff level about how much of the GIPWE could remain as policy, as it were, and how much of it needed to become rules. We received input from the field that in some cases, in fact in most cases, they would be more comfortable if what is contained in the GIPWE, at least as much as possible of it, became rule. It would also make it much easier to enforce it, obviously. So for that reason, we have undertaken the process of examining the GIPWE to determine which parts of it could remain or should remain as written policy, and which parts of it should become what amounts to board rules. That's going to take a few months, obviously, but the process is underway. One of the people who works in the department that I have the privilege of leading has developed a matrix. Vanjie Israel has developed a matrix that's going to help walk us through that process, and we anticipate that we will be able to do it, but once again, we want to do it carefully, so it will be a few months before that's finished. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Of course, by putting it in rules, that also means there is that time period where it's out for public comment as a rule. So that will also take some time.
Right.
Any questions? Comments? Thank you very much, Dr. Couch.
Thank you.
Anything to add to that, Joe?
No, I think that's the important thing is for you to know that when you hear comments, it's going through the normal process of rulemaking.
Okay, great. Our next agenda item is discussion of doctoral program proposals. And Joe, I believe Roger Alford is going to help you with that.
Yes.
And he's halfway up here. Welcome this morning, Roger.
This is on, should be on your handouts there. I'd like to start a bit with the GIAC update that you see there. The Graduate Education Advisory Committee was formed around the doctoral report that was published in 2004, so there's a direct association with doctoral efforts. The committee has been working on a strategic plan and is still underway. We expect to have some goals and some action items after the next September meeting, but right now that's the progress that we've made so far, trying to develop a strategic plan for doctoral education in Texas. The next item there is 18 doctoral program characteristics, and those are listed underneath that page. One of the recommendations from the 2004 doctoral report was to develop some indicators of program activity for doctoral programs in Texas public institutions. Those are listed there. We're involved in defining and designing a web page for the accrediting board, as well as having that kind of information transportable to institutions' web pages, so students, faculty, other interested parties can compare doctoral programs on these 18 characteristics. It's quite a move to get some information at the program level. We don't have that yet. A lot of times people confuse this kind of information with our accountability system, but as you're aware, the accountability system is at the institution level. So this gets right down at the program level. We think it will be very helpful. The last item involves inclusiveness in doctoral education. This is a morphing from diversity, but that's the subject of the report. We've had a doctoral intern from Texas A&M Corpus Christi working with us for about a year to write a report on inclusiveness in doctoral education. He's going to be here tomorrow for a brown bag for interested parties in the agency, and this will eventually be published and available for institutions around the state to look at things such as the statistics about underrepresented groups in doctoral education to look at best practices and those kind of opportunities for them to increase inclusiveness in doctoral education. So that's a brief update for GIAC activities. I'd like to move beyond the 18 characteristics page and move to a chart that's titled Existing Doctoral Programs and walk you through that. This is the first attempt at trying to organize the existing doctoral programs in Texas, and we've listed across the columns there the types of institutions that offer doctoral programs. Health Science Centers are 2 research institutions, emerging research institutions, and there are 7 of those. You can see them listed below there in the bottom chart, and all other institutions that offer doctoral programs in Texas, and there are 15 of those. So there's quite a distribution across the types of institutions that offer doctoral programs. Now the row definitions are the first row practice doctorates, and that includes first professional degrees like JDs, MDs, audiology degrees, that kind of thing. In addition to those first professional degrees, we've labeled other doctoral degrees that are practice-oriented, such as the EDD. So those are the kinds of degrees, and you can see there are 105 degree programs across the institutions that I've described earlier. The second category, or the second row, involves degrees that include applied practice, or rather applied research and practice. Those are degrees such as clinical psychology, where not only do you have the tools and the capability to offer or to conduct research, but also to practice in that degree. It includes business administration kinds of degrees, counseling degrees, that kind of thing. And I will tell you that a lot of these categorizations are somewhat gray and can go either way, but this is our attempt to kind of put them in these categories. The last row is basic research, and this defines the traditional research-oriented degree: chemistry, history, English, those kinds of things. This is a distribution of the 718 doctoral programs that we've got in Texas public institutions right now. Most of the research, basic research, is conducted in the 2 kinds of institutions that are the top tier, are the flagship institutions. Let's turn to the next page. In looking at the characteristics of both the research institutions and the emerging research institutions, you'll find quite a distribution. Not all of these institutions are alike. In the 3 areas that I've described here: the research and development expenditures, the number of doctoral programs, and the number of graduates. There's quite a distribution across there. Texas has said, in general, that the research-oriented institutions and the emerging research institutions should be focused on these kinds of doctoral activities. Now let's turn to the last page, and this is a depiction of the doctoral programs that we have in queue right now, given that framework that I described on the first page. And you'll see the distribution of the types and the types of doctorates and the kinds of institutions that we have. We've had quite an increase in the number of practice doctorates over the past several months, mostly attributable to the Doctor of Physical Therapy and the Doctor of Nursing practice. And then below that, you'll see the 2 existing requests for preliminary authority in the practice area that we have to consider. In the past, when we've gotten doctoral proposals at the agency, our general approach to reviewing those has pretty much been on a first-come, first-served basis, with some exceptions. If a proposal was not quite up to standards, it could get delayed. But we didn't look at those characteristics that you saw in the matrix to consider which ones ought to take priority and which ones should not take priority. We hope that further discussions about this framework, and we're having dialogue with the systems in Texas institutions and with other individuals. We intend to bring this to GIAC as well to see how the framework fits and if it's going to work for us as we consider doctoral proposals in the future. Another consideration that we're looking at, and this kind of lines up with one of the committees that's underway, given the past legislation, is how should dissertations be funded? Right now, they're funded on a formula funding basis. Are there other ways that we should consider when we look at the different types of doctorates that we're talking about here, and the progress that students would make in writing dissertations? That's my report.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do you have the same data for private, non-public institutions?
Right, we could get that probably, but we don't have, it's not reflected on this.
Do you not get involved in their doctoral program requests and that kind of stuff?
No, we don't.
I might just add a comment or two. This is clearly a very early attempt to categorize, to try to put some structure behind what we do. As we have the dialogue, it obviously will change, but I think you can see kind of the extremes of things with this. That first line of practice doctorates, none of those carry the PhD label or the DSC label. On the other hand, those that are labeled research all carry either a PhD or DSC label. The real problem, obviously, is that middle line. Which of those which carry a PhD label are, in fact, a little more like some of those that don't? When you begin to move into then the prioritization for approval of new ones, it's kind of easy to say, okay, we're going to probably be pretty favorable towards approving those in the lower left corner, that is the truly research doctorates at the institutions that have a major research mission, and much less likely to approve truly research-oriented programs at institutions that don't have that mission. We're probably going to be pretty inclined to go with service-oriented doctorates, particularly in the health professions where that's the national trend. And so again, you can see where the gray areas will be as you use this framework. But we thought that by trying to create some kind of a structure, we could at least categorize programs that need more scrutiny and those that we can sort of say, okay, those make sense, they fit the programs. And then that'll also allow us, as we begin to try to strengthen the process of reviewing individual existing programs, to have a more rational framework for it.
Can I add one thing to that? Because it's been said at previous meetings, and I want to make sure people remember this, because you haven't. It's been inferred by the type of analysis, but one thing that's been happening in the last 2 years is the emergence of different kinds of degrees with the word doctorate in the title, and began a number of years ago with the PharmD, which was a very practice-oriented degree. One could say it was in some ways similar to a master's. One could say it was similar to a first professional degree. At the time that came about, there were existing PharmDs that looked more or less like PhDs. And so these new PharmDs emerged, and we have a whole series of doctorates in the health area, such as some of those that Joe mentioned, that are somewhat different than what we expect of a traditional PhD, and the staff's trying to sort out how to look at those in terms of analysis and how they fit in. Another thing that hasn't been explicitly stated here is you may recall from a few years ago a staff analysis that pointed out that we had something like 28 universities, public universities, that offer doctorates. And so part of that is to what extent do we want to continue that practice, and under what conditions, and are practice-oriented doctorates appropriate in some cases for some of those more regionally focused institutions, such as, say, an EDD in curriculum and instruction, whereas a PhD in physics, one could argue whether it is. One final point in terms of the private institutions data, I just want to point out that we have relatively few private institutions in Texas that offer the doctorate. Rice has the greatest number, and the others go to Baylor and SMU and TCU, but none of those last three offer a great range of doctorates, so they have a number of those. And there is data available on that if we needed it from the IPEDS, the federal level.
Perhaps one other observation: the way we count programs is not necessarily the way other states or even the private institutions will count programs. For that matter, we're not entirely consistent even within our own system. So in some cases, we'll break up into subcategories, and in other cases, we'll lump them all together. So I'm trying to think of an example. The best example probably in education.
Well, actually, there's a number of fields. I mean, psychology is one, and part of it it's board policy. The board policy many years ago apparently was that if you come in with a unique doctoral program, even though there are others, you could perhaps justify it. And we have one or two institutions that have many unique doctoral programs that are in very narrow areas. I don't believe any of you were on the board when we approved a PhD in what was it, transatlantic history, as a unique area. And at another school like Texas A&M, we probably have on the books a PhD in history, which would include a broad range of areas. So part of that was a reflection of how the board addressed its role at various points in history, and it's never been sort of brought in line over the years. There's been really no demand for it.
You always get questions from the regional universities. Paul and I are kind of from the hinterlands, so we probably get more of those where, a small university that isn't a research-based school wants to venture into PhD programs, say in like an education area that they do a lot of like master's levels degrees or those kind of things in.
And that's part of the eventual discussion for that. And I think Joe, I don't know if he wants to bring up now, and the commissioner earlier has brought up the notion of, are there occasions where a regional university might have a practice-oriented program, but also research should appropriately be addressed on regional issues, that there's a reason for that, and if it's targeted on those regional issues, there may be
industrial concentration, the kind of economic base in that area to bring PhD programs.
So that's something that's been on the table, and the board hasn't really addressed that.
And as this discussion continues with this report that's being developed, I know that all the regional universities really would like that to be an active part of the discussion. Since I won't be here to do that, I just want to make sure that I put that pitch in for all the regional universities, that the full board really needs to have some very deliberate conversations and all those issues brought to the table to look at. If you had any calls or anybody talk to you about that, Paul, I know I get them.
Oh yeah, I get them.
Yeah.
And I know Raymond is interested in trying to sort of create an environment where we have more than two top-tier universities, and where there's more research dollars, more degree programs, and everything else at the other universities. And I think it's important.
anything you want to say? Dr.
Well,
Quinn?
yes,
And Lauren has something to say. I haven't forgotten you, baby. I haven't forgot you.
No, I think we need a well-balanced array of doctoral programs across the state that address regional economic needs, that address regional cultural characteristics, that address specific issues related to particular parts of the state. I think, for example, that it makes sense that Texas A&M International have a doctoral program in international business. I think it makes sense that UT El Paso have programs related to the border economy and the migration of phenomena across borders and so forth. And I also think that we need to have a policy in Texas where doctoral programs are evaluated regularly so that we can determine both their efficacy and their quality. I think that there's been a tendency over the past 15 years to focus more on access to doctoral education, and we need to balance that access with quality. And I think we need to look at our funding formulas to make certain that we don't create unintended or inappropriate incentives for institutions to create doctoral programs that we either don't need or that the institutions proposing them can't execute very well.
My turn?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's
We kind of went off.
No, that's all right. I'm kind of perplexed by the second page that lists Texas A&M and the University of Texas and the amazing difference in research dollars and numbers of programs. And I want to go back to something that Paul said about the independent institutions in the state. It seems to me that if we add the private schools, private institutions along with the state ones, that we would have a richer and more comprehensive list, not only for the state of Texas and for our agency, but also for other states to look upon Texas. Certainly if we look at other states, we think about Stanford or some of the private universities. We don't just look at the state universities. So I think that there's something to be said for looking at all of them. And the other piece is how much does this, and I think I know the answer to this, and I really hope that I'm wrong, but how much do the research and development dollars impact the title or label of top tier universities? I mean, is this what we're looking at? I mean, is this, if we look at U.S. News and World Report, which I know, but I mean, that's what people read. And if they're looking at universities within the state of Texas, this is what they're going to look at, right?
Indeed they are, and that does raise some interesting issues. And if I may further amplify your point with some data that I'm remembering from a year or so ago when I was in San Antonio. When you look at it by institution, San Antonio doesn't look like a very big research community. When you add together, though, all of the universities and the not-for-profit research organizations in the community, if those were all under one label, San Antonio would rank right up there in the top 10. So it's some of it is in the way it's perceived and the way it's counted, and
So you're adding in research outside.
This is an institution at which Joe was employed, and I ought to point out that there are other institutions in the top 10. If you added all that in for them,
It would take them even higher.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But fair enough, David. But my point is simply that the way you count.
The business of adding in like outside university.
Well, yeah, you look at Houston, you add in Baylor College of Medicine,
Yeah.
Rice, the UT Health Science
Cut
Center,
that off and
University of
where do you
Houston,
go?
NASA.
I guess my point is,
Private institutions.
but my point is how do other states market, for use of a better word, their comprehensive programs, looking at their research dollars, looking at the number of programs and number of graduates? And are we looking at it the same way that other states would?
Apples and oranges.
Yeah.
It's done both ways. First of all, regarding the U.S. News and World Report rankings, that's primarily the quality of undergraduate programs. So they really don't factor into their rankings, research equations. If you look at the list of the top 15 or 20 research universities in the country, the amount of federal research support tracks very closely to the rankings. The institutions at the top are MIT, Stanford, Johns Hopkins. UCLA is at the top of the list. Those are the premier research universities. There are times, for example, when particular regions, usually for some public relations reasons, do aggregate everything. There was an article that appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle that I circulated among the senior staff here that made the argument that the Bay Area, with the presence primarily of Berkeley and Stanford, a public and private university, had more intellectual capital, particularly in high-tech fields, than any city in the world. So there was a clear case of aggregating the two. It depends on the scenario, but it's done both ways.
Well, once getting the baseline data or benchmarking, would it be our responsibility or the responsibility of the individual institutions to then take it to the next step and say, where do we want to go? And are they doing that?
Well, we're certainly looking at where we want to be and where we want to go.
That's part of closing the gaps, the research part.
Yes.
And those local institutions are also looking at where they want to be, because they're the people that are calling me and calling Paul because they want to expand or at least get some kind of doctoral representation on their campus. So that's a real philosophical discussion.
Yeah, and it's understandable as long as they have their core mission being the undergraduate and doing that right.
Absolutely.
And you're hedging on one of the fundamental questions is, from a state policy standpoint, how many institutions do you want to set as a goal being a research institution with the different kind of mission that entails, and will that take away from what we want to do? And can we, with 35 public universities, is that something reasonably we should do as a state? What impact does that have on our undergraduates? And 90+% of our students are undergraduates. Other states have made decisions in that regard, and as an earlier staff report pointed out, we have far more public institutions offering the doctorates, and offering doctorates doesn't mean you're heavily engaged in research necessarily. Remember, and you can see that in some of the numbers below. And I should say some of the institutions below are including San Antonio, are far ahead of where they were 5 years ago. I mean, they're being much more competitive in terms of research. But there's some fundamental questions when you only have so many dollars. The research dollars are somewhat like graduation rates were for a long time in Texas. Nobody talked much about the graduation rates at UT and A&M because they were so much higher than everyone else's, but they weren't as high as their peers nationally. They stand out in terms of Texas in terms of R&D dollars, but they don't compare that well with their peers nationally. And so on down the line, part of this is we have a long way to go overall in taking all of our institutions to a higher level, whatever their current state is and whatever their eventual role is, and we need to be supportive of, decide how best to be supportive of that.
And there's always the question that Raymond raised about the access versus the quality.
Exactly.
And the evaluation of what's there and where those resources might be better used within that university or programs in other parts of the state that could meet that need better. I mean, there's a whole lot of issues to get on the table.
That's a primary higher educational challenge we face in Texas.
Yeah.
How do you balance access and quality?
Big question. And one that the board really needs to weigh as we go forward with this. So there are a lot of issues to discuss beyond just all the data gathering.
One other point comparing to other states, and comes back to the independent college one, is that we don't have the number of private institutions engaged in research at a high level that other states do. California being a great example, New York.
Huge.
you know, they have a huge contribution from the research standpoint by the private institutions, and for the most part, our private institutions are focused on undergraduates, and we benefit from that. That's a good thing, but we don't have that, the Caltech, which is fairly small but makes a big contribution, or the Rockefeller Institute, or the Rensselaer, that some people don't know about, but are very
Carnegie
significant.
Mellon?
Yeah, Carnegie Mellon.
So I think the issue Paul brought up about factoring in those private institutions in Texas is really a valid point.
I'd like
We
to
should
see
look
it.
at including that.
I think, in order for us, long-term to kind of evaluate where we are, and it all goes to closing the gaps. I mean, we close the gaps with every tool we've got available, and that certainly includes private institutions. So I want to be sure that
We'll certainly have that kind of data as we move forward on this. This is a very preliminary one, but we thought we ought to go ahead and share it with you before
and it's
we done
good.
much with it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we're moving along.
Maybe Donald Smith could send to you the research dollars we have for private institutions. Some institutions voluntarily select that, and I think there are about 8 or 9 that do now, Linda, for that. Yeah. And those would be the equivalent to the dollars in this column, because these are all research expenditures.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, Rob. We appreciate that. And now we'll move on to Linda's. We're going to discuss 2 program announcements: Advanced Research Program, our ARP, and Technology Workforce Development. Linda's going to explain these 2, but first I would like to take a moment to recognize the passing of Dr. Norman Hackerman, who chaired our A-Corp, the advisory committee to our board, who was 95 years old. And I had the honor and pleasure of serving on that committee that Dr. Hackerman chaired, and have gotten to know him over the past 6 years. And he was one of the most amazing individuals I have ever known, and every head at this table is nodding. And for those of you who did not have the opportunity to know him, and I certainly didn't know him as well as I would like to have, but he was on the go constantly, kept his research lab in Houston. As all of you know, he was president of UT, and he was also president of Rice. And he still taught a freshman class, an introductory chemistry class, correct? Until the end, and he played squash every day, right, and beat all the young guys, which is why one of the many reasons he continued to be so vibrant. And any of us would love to have a life that was as rich and meaningful as Norm's. And I know he will be missed as a towering figure in Texas research and science, as well as to his family and his friends all over the state, the nation, and the world, because he had that kind of a presence. And it is a loss that is really felt by everybody in higher education, and the literally thousands of students' lives that he impacted. And talk about, we were just talking about the doctoral program and research in Texas. He is one of the leaders in transforming UT, particularly, to a research institution, and Rice. So, that old thing about, people think one person can't make a difference. Wrong. When the person is somebody like Norm, a difference was made, and that difference will be felt throughout the history of our state. So I know I speak on behalf of everyone here that we will miss him greatly, and research and educational efforts in Texas will miss him as well, but always feel the impact of what he brought. Is there anything you'd like to say?
No, I knew Norm a little bit. He was a very impressive figure, and always focused on quality, and always focused on very high standards, which I much admired. And he was a straight-talking person. He was very honest, and it was a pleasure to work with him. And you're right. He's the kind of educational leader that comes along once a generation.
Mm-hmm. And in this, and never took his eye off the ball.
Never.
In this last session, at 95 years of age, he was writing documents, making phone calls to me, making phone calls to you, like, are you people at the coordinating board, are you really focused on this and getting us more money for research and, yeah, right?
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
always being a person that was trying to move the agenda forward and to get more research dollars and emphasis on that in the state of Texas. So, he was a terrific guy, and our state is richer in many ways because of him.
He was president of UT when I went to school there, and his signature is on my diploma.
And that tells us how old you are.
Yes, it does.
I think it's on mine too.
Not mine. But, okay, so we just wanted to pay homage to him, and I know that kind of puts the hamper on, but we're just wanted to revel in the memory of him a little bit, Linda, and I know you have some actual work that you'd like to take place here.
Okay. And Dr. Hackerman would want this to move forward.
He would.
So we're going to move this forward. The program announcement, which will be coming to the board for your quarterly meeting in July, was recommended to you by the Advisory Committee on Research Programs at their meeting on June 8th, and Dr. Hackerman chaired that meeting. Okay, I'd like to point out a few of the changes from the program announcement for the previous competition. This time we're returning to our old ways. We're not placing a limit on the number of submissions that an institution can give us. We had quite a bit of feedback about placing those submission limits on the institutions. We did that because we only had $8 million, and we typically get 1,600 proposals coming forward for this competition. So we're expecting 1,600 proposals again. Those proposals will initially be pre-proposals. We use a pre-proposal process to limit the number of full proposals that have to be developed and reviewed. One of our former external review panels had pointed out that with our very low success rate, high competition rate for this money, we were wasting a lot of investigators' time developing full proposals when those proposals had little hope of funding. So we did put into place a pre-proposal process, and we are returning to that. A pre-proposal from a principal investigator is as many characters as you can possibly fit on a single sheet of paper. It's 4,000 characters, including spaces. So we'll be doing that again.
Don't you love the way research people do
I
this
know.
stuff? I just love it.
Okay.
Sitting on that committee was always fascinating to me, non-research person I am.
Okay. It is quite a blessing and a privilege to serve as a staff member for that committee. There's a lot of high-powered thinking that goes on, and I'm always behind them. They're way out ahead, and I just rush to catch up as best I can. Okay, the comptroller certified the budget on about, I have it here somewhere, I think it was coming through on June 7th or June 8th. It was in the paper on June 8th. And we believe we have $16.4 million in funding for the advanced research program. There was a contingency of the comptroller finding that there was sufficient general revenue for the last $8.3 million. Okay, that is allocated to 8 areas of basic research by the advisory committee. What they did was they used a Delphi process. And in that process, the individuals vote individually without sharing that information initially with their partners on the amount of funding for each of those research areas. The data is provided back to them, showing them the average amount of funding for the research area and the mean. And it took them 2 rounds of that Delphi process to reach a final allocation for each of those research areas. The largest, of course, is the biological sciences, coming in a little under $6 million, and then engineering clocking in at about $2.6 million. Most of the other areas also get $1 to $1.5 million. Okay, the maximum award amount is $150,000. That's because the funding is still limited, and we are trying to maximize the number of awards. It's typically the case that the mathematics proposals don't usually ask for the full amount. They, of course, can. If everyone asks for the full amount, we'll be funding about 109 proposals. And those proposals selected for funding by our review panels will come to the board at your April 2008 meeting. The institutions or principal investigators are allowed to submit a bonus proposal. Each proposal Each investigator can submit one, but they can also pair in a bonus proposal where a large research institution is paired with a small institution. That's to increase collaboration. There's increased emphasis on student research education on the proposal evaluation form. One of the important points that Dr. Hackerman always stressed was that what these programs produce is the future workforce, a continuous stream of science and engineering students going forward into the Texas workforce. And that's where your progress comes from. It doesn't come from the big discoveries that pop up every now and then, essentially like you're mining diamonds. It comes from the continuous incremental progress over time, and it comes from student research education. The independent institutions, the advisory committee recommended to you that they be allowed to participate in the advanced research program. They also recommended that we seek, as a board, $75 million in funding. That didn't quite happen with the legislature. And the bills, there was a Senate bill and a House bill, both to allow the independent institutions to participate. Those were not passed into law, so the independent institutions are not going to be able to participate. I'd like to thank Gayla Peters for developing the program announcement, and of course ACOR for providing very clear direction on how it should go forward to the board. We have some copies if you'd like to see that. We have 5 copies available to you here. You'll certainly be getting it in the mailing of the board materials. Okay, we have another program announcement, and that is for the Technology Workforce Development Grant Program. Reinhold Cornelius has been single-handedly handling that particular program. It's an exciting program that has a lot of input from Texas industries. They've stayed with the program. They're very much involved in sitting down at the table together to see if they can't make an impact on the number of engineering and computer science students getting baccalaureate degrees in the state. So I'll hand it over now to Reinhold Cornelius if there are no questions for the advanced research program announcement.
Any questions for Linda?
I just wanted to make a comment. Although the amount of money that we ultimately received for the advanced research program was not close to what we had initially requested, it was a real struggle to get the amount of money that we ultimately did, and there was involvement by an awful lot of people. Bob Shepard called the controller at the last minute to ask her to certify some funding. Senator Zaffarini was a stalwart and constantly pulling this legislation back up to the front after it had been buried. Senator Shapiro was initially skeptical about the program and then became a supporter. The lieutenant governor became interested in it. There were a lot of people that worked very hard on this project because we were so committed to it, and we had such a strong belief in its excellence. And so I just wanted to acknowledge a lot of board members were very active in getting this thing funded, and it was a real struggle. It took a lot of hard work.
Okay, thank you. And people have pointed out that we've doubled our money.
Yeah.
So that's another way to look at it. It is going the right direction now.
We didn't get everything we wanted, but we got a lot more than we had.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning. The second program announcement is that of the Technology Workforce Development Grant Program, and it is the 5th grant cycle under this program, which was established in 2001, and it is the second cycle, what we call the Texas Engineering and Technical Consortium, Texas Youth and Technology grant cycle, and we say short TTEC, TYT. And this is, has a special name because these grants fund work targeted on 14 to 21-year-old, and in the high schools and community colleges and at the beginning stage of their university studies. The project leaders are, and the proposers for these grants are accredited public engineering departments, all engineering and all public computer science departments, and also the electrical engineering departments of independent institutions. These departments can collaborate with each other, and they're also encouraged to collaborate with community colleges and secondary schools. There are 4 program components for these grants. First, internship programs to give those students work experience, work study and scholarship programs, depending on what the institutions seem best fit for their situation, and recruitment, retention, mentoring best practices, which have come forward from these grants in the past, and also some course redesign to ease the students into the math requirements required for engineering. The first TYT cycle is still going on right now and was funded in 2 phases. The first phase was for $1 million for 11 months, and the second phase was for $2 million for the same grants to continue for another 14 months. And the transition from phase 1 to phase 2 is happening right now at the end of this month. The program announcement, which we have a draft for you at the board meeting, will go to the advisory committee for these grants, the TWD advisory committee, tomorrow at their meeting. And as it stands, it's following the model of the first TTEC-TYT cycle, and that is that the grants will be funded against in 2 phases. So the program announcement goes to the October board meeting, to the July board meeting, and the grants would be made in October. The grants would start January of next year till the end of the fiscal year with phase 1, and phase 1 would get $3 million. And then follow-up would be phase 2 for the following fiscal year, 2009, with $4 million. So there's a total of $7 million we hope available. These funds come from the governor's office through us via through the Workforce Commission, and they are again Department of Labor funds. As it stands, the draft right now, we have a budget cap on these grants so that we hope to fund somewhat fewer than 30 projects with these grants. But I'm sure the committee tomorrow will discuss that detail. I have 2 copies of the draft if you'd like to look at it.
Any questions? Great, thank you. Linda, I think you are involved in the next item on the agenda as well, correct?
Yes, you can't get rid of me yet.
We are happy to have you here. This is an overview of 2 research reports, Technology Development and Transfer, which is Intellectual Property Income and Expenses, and Fiscal Year 2006 Research Expenditures Report. Linda?
Okay, both of these are reports that come from surveys of the institutions. The Technology Development and Transfer Report is a survey of the public institutions, and the Research Expenditures Report surveys not only the public now, but also the independent institutions at their request. I have, Linda is handing out a single page with a few items of note for each of these reports. We're going to be sending you a communication with hot links to these reports from our website. The Technology Development and Transfer Report is a relatively new report. It was put in place in 2001 by the 77th Texas Legislature, and it's meant to be a biennial report. The third report is the one we're issuing now. It's issued in March 2007, and it covers fiscal years 2005 and 2006. What it's about is intellectual property developed at the institutions, protected, and commercialized. So you can think of this as an intellectual property flow. It starts with an invention discovery, that's an invention disclosure that's filed with the institution by an investigator who makes, perhaps knowingly or surprisingly, a discovery in the lab. The institution may elect, it typically uses a committee to review these invention disclosures. It may elect to protect that intellectual property by seeking a patent. If so, it'll file a patent application. If the patent is approved by the U.S. Patent Office, a patent is issued. The institution can, in the presence of a patent or in the absence of a patent, pursue a licensing agreement with a willing partner, someone who is a company or a business, or even perhaps a principal investigator startup company that is willing to buy the authority to use that intellectual property for gain. In that licensing agreement, they may spell out how much of any future income should go back to the university. They typically do. Perhaps there will be equity, shares of something privately held or publicly held that will go back to the university. There may be research dollars flowing back to the university as a result of that licensing agreement. The bottom line is the public higher education institutions in Texas receive about $40 million a year in cash from intellectual property. They hold equity interest in public companies to the tune of about $4 million. And they also hold a considerable number of shares in non-public companies in consideration for their use of intellectual property. The technology licensing officers in the universities have a bit of dilemma. They can up the amount of royalty income they get by selling out some of these shares that they hold in the public and private companies, but that may not be in the best interest of the university. So a technology licensing officer has to determine whether to sell and get cash for their interest or whether to hold it in hopes of gaining future a better position. And so many of them are holding now. Okay, protecting intellectual property costs the institutions money. It costs the institutions to pursue the patents. It costs the institutions to litigate patent infringements. And it costs them about $16 million a year to run their entire operation, including the patent prosecution and litigation costs. A third of the reporting institutions receive income that actually exceeds their expenses. So when you're looking at this report, you're seeing for a single fiscal year the number of patents that go forward. Now, the patents that are issued are typically from previous years. The invention disclosures may not have yet turned into patents. So each of those columns represents activity from prior years and income from prior years. And that's all I was going to say about the Technology Development and Transfer Report. You will be receiving email notification and a link to it. We do have 5 copies available now if you'd like to take one home with you.
Okay,
Well,
so am I understanding that 2/3 of the reporting institutions lose money?
yes.
Okay.
There,
On a cash basis at the present time. And
Right.
I really think, and
Yeah.
I must emphasize
Yeah, long-
how much you have to read this with care.
Yeah.
And think of these in many cases as startup kinds of ventures, a lot of upfront expense and a lot of uncertainty about future revenues.
if they didn't protect any of the property, the royalty income would be very low. Okay, but the royalty income comes from past expenses to prosecute those patents and past staff activity. And so when you see these institutions, 2/3 of them still running in the red, it just means that they're starting to play the game. And it's typically the case that the amount that they are in the red decreases over time, and they do move up into, in some cases, quite sizable incomes. It's typically the case that a few properties will be responsible for most of your income. For Texas A&M, an important producer of income are the end caps that you see on the guardrails on the interstate. A number of you have probably seen these on the way in already. Those yellow and black end caps, they're designed to absorb impact, resulting in a saving of life, and that's where a lot of the Texas A&M income is currently coming from. UT Southwestern has Citracal, among others. I think there's a Freestyle diabetes kit that is coming out of University of Texas at Austin. UT Southwestern sold Myogen to Gilead Life Sciences, for about $25 million this year. That Myogen had property license to it that actually arose from an ARP-ATP grant. It dealt with congestive heart failure and the mechanism underlying cardiac hypertrophy.
I think you ought to think about Linda's first example, though, with A&M, because people tend to think of the intellectual property enough as those latter examples, and sometimes it's things that aren't that exotic in some ways. I mean, essentially, I don't know if these are the same caps, but originally what A&M had, I mean, it was really using barrels to absorb impact, and there's more to it than that, but some of the examples are simple, and the sort of the, University of Florida years ago trying to help the football team Gatorade.
Very simple idea.
Some of these things are simple, or sometimes a scientist may design an apparatus to do the research, and the apparatus is what really brings in the income, and the result of the research itself may be important, but it doesn't bring in the income. But they had to develop to do the research. So it's really hard to know, and that's one of the things that is a real challenge, is what it will really produce income, and what is really important in terms of knowledge, expanding knowledge, and they're not always the same thing. And since you haven't been around as long, I mean, Linda could tell you that what she reports in terms of the protection, 15 years ago, that one of our issues was that institutions were really not protecting much of their intellectual property, and much of it was essentially being given away. And so it's that fine line between, where do you spend dollars to protect, rather than just giving it up, which was largely what was happening.
Right.
And the other part of that is sometimes you need to protect it simply to get it out there. So those end caps wouldn't be saving lives if somebody weren't in the business of producing them.
And how do you disclose enough to industry so they'll want to invest without giving up?
Right.
It's too much. That it's important. And the whole concept, the whole area of intellectual property and producing people who understand the law is really as important as some of the science.
Well, part of the purpose of the Act was to place increased emphasis on technology licensing offices and technology licensing centers at the universities. The Millikan Institute recently published a study, came out in 2006, that showed that institutions that had technology licensing offices, those that did not have technology licensing offices were only able to recover 79% of the income of those with the technology licensing offices. So there's a decided gain to going ahead and having an office that works directly with the principal investigators and helps them understand and pursue intellectual property protection. Okay, our next report is a research expenditures report for fiscal year 2006. Those of you who've been on the board are used to seeing this report. It's a report with about 20 tables full of numbers. It's an annual report. It's authorized by statute. It includes both the public and the independent higher education institutions, and if you take that whole group together, the amount that the Texas academics are spending for research and development is now slightly over $3 billion. $2.5 billion of that is expended at the public institutions. The federal government supplies 59% of the money for that research. Typically, primarily, it's the National Institutes of Health. Most of the funds are expended on research in medicine and biological sciences. UT Austin, Texas A&M, and Baylor College of Medicine are running neck and neck for places 1, 2, and 3 among our institutions, with 440 to 450 million for research expenditures at each of those institutions. And we've been watching the race between the public health-related institutions and the universities. They've been running neck and neck for about 2 years now, and it looks like the public health-related institutions are now pulling past the universities. If you see it on the graph, they're both sitting there at about $1.3 billion. Dale Cherry, who is not here today, was responsible for getting a survey out to the institutions and getting the numbers back in for the report and putting the report together with a lot of help from Jan Helfelder, and I'd like to thank them for their effort on that. Dale also worked on the technology development and transfer report. We did ask the contacts at the institutions for these two reports to come to the coordinating board or to phone into the coordinating board for a meeting that we held on May 18th to get their input on the survey, and their input will be used to formulate future surveys and reports. We have a process here that goes through the coordinating board's data collection committee, so we'll send that forward to that committee. Are there any questions? We do have copies of the research expenditures report here, and it shows you how the institutions are doing. We'll send you the link also.
Any questions or comments?
I have a question that may or may not be related, but speaking of Baylor College of Medicine, how does the recent NIH designation for the Cancer Center at Baylor College of Medicine impact this report? In other words, obviously a lot of research expenditures had to be, amassed in order to qualify. It's probably one of, 2 or 3, I think 3 in the state that have that designation.
Okay.
Is there any kind of correlation?
Oh, they've had the Genome Project funded by the NIH for a while. I don't know that there will be a step function increase in their research expenditures where you have something that looks exactly like a step. It's usually the case with the institutions, if you plot them out, that they tend to just gradually increase. There may be a little bit of up and down motion as their big grants come in and then fall off. But for the most part, if you plot it over time, I would expect to see them to continue on a curve with that designation. Right now, NIH funding is very tight, and we have heard from the institutions that they're actually losing some of the faculty because the faculty at the health science centers tend to have to pull in their own salary support through research dollars. At Baylor, if you look at the numbers they reported this year and the numbers they reported last year, they're actually even, pretty close to even. There may be, it depends on how NIH decides to flow future funding to Baylor.
Will it be increased because of this designation, do you think? I mean, is this a big deal that maybe, I know that not to single out Baylor, but it seems to me that maybe the coordinating board or the commissioner should send a letter of congratulations to them. I mean, I think it's a big deal that they have this designation.
Okay, we can certainly do that. I would expect there to be a little lag time, and then perhaps their expenditures to go up at a little more rapid rate than previously.
It was a pretty big announcement in a lot of national press on it.
Another thing that has changed for our institutions is we now have a national lab at the UT Medical Branch at Galveston.
What you're saying, it is important because Texas institutions have not been historically competitive for national labs and various designations, and it's beginning to happen a little bit more. So it is important, and it looks like Brenda may have made a note to send a note.
Well, and actually, that also goes back to what Paul said about the numbers of doctoral programs and research. It seems that Baylor probably more than carries its weight. They're the medical school with the doctors of, what would it be, philosophy and the MDs and all those different degrees, it seems like, and that's private. It seems like that would really boost our numbers.
Well, they do. Our health centers, public health science centers boosted as well. That's where we're most competitive nationally, is in those
But
areas.
Baylor wouldn't have been counted in those other numbers.
That's correct.
Well, and the focus earlier, I think, was, and because of the way it was presented, I don't think it was clear that part of the issue was what do we want to do at public universities.
I understand
So
that.
that's why there was that focus. I mean, in this report, you will in fact see Baylor
Right.
reported.
Exactly.
And so it is included, and it's a big driver. In fact, Baylor does partner with some public universities and private on some various activities. And you know, being from Houston, that most of the Houston institutions have been involved in some various efforts, particularly nanomedicine, and recently, and Kay Bailey Hutchinson announcing some federal dollars going there. So they're clearly a factor, and Houston in general has such strength in the health-related areas. In fact, we're fortunate because Dallas does, and San Antonio does. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, and these are things people know over time but aren't mentioned, Linda's report talks about expenditures. So if, in fact, say, Baylor were to get $10 million from Baylor College of Medicine, it would not be reported here as $10 million, it would be reported as it's spent. And that gives you some evenness to a real understanding of the research enterprise. So if they got 10, it might be stretched over 5 years, or it might be over 2 years, depends on the nature of it. So there is a ratcheting up, and probably, not knowing more details about this, Baylor was doing enough, it already ratcheted up enough that they got that designation because of what they had already, how they had moved up. And but I think everyone's point today is a good one, that we need to make sure that we include the privates. And actually, you know, staff have not discussed privates as much as that they did at one time. We're really supposed to include consideration of private offerings in the analysis of the degree programs. I mean, say in Dallas, if UT Dallas wants to do something, what is SMU doing? What is TCU doing? Texas Wesleyan, University of Dallas, as a factor. And I do think you will still see, though it isn't emphasized in the staff write-ups, that say if there were someone wanted a new clinical psych doctor, I think you would see that Baylor offers that, and Rice. I think those are the only two private universities that do. So you still see reference to that, but it's not emphasized as much. But I believe, Roger, is it not true that those schools would at least be mentioned? And we probably could do a better job of talking about that.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Agenda item 7 is a review of our committee agenda for our July board meeting, and I think Joe will walk us through that.
I know you're eager to get onto the summit, so we'll try to move through it fairly quickly. I would point out that we're almost 30 days away from that meeting, and so I expect that the committee chair's report that you heard this morning will be amended to pick up a few additional things that occur in the next 30 days. Clearly, the update on doctoral program review that you heard this morning will be updated to reflect some of your comments this morning, and some additional work that we'll try to do. And that would bring us then to item C, the recommendation to approve a branch campus at Pearland. And we have the president from Clear Lake here if you have questions. I can tell you that they've been in, giving us good briefings, good materials. It makes a lot of sense to establish a branch campus there in facilities that the community is prepared to construct, lease to them, or lease a major portion of to them, and they've got some other folks that they'll put in the remainder of the building and then take them back out if the program grows as fast as it looks like it might. They've presented some very conservative estimates of the potential for growth, and as I say, all of the programmatic things look good to us as staff. Facilities issues are lease issues that would normally come forward to the commissioner for approval, and I think they're still working on that application, but given the timing, we felt we needed to get this on your committee agenda, and so we have the president here to respond to questions if you have them.
Any questions? What would our focus be here?
Is typical of our branch campuses around the state. The heavy emphasis ends up being in teacher education and business, and then other things that are kind of driven by local economy, and I don't recall the specifics.
Welcome. We're glad you're here today.
Be very quick, given the timeline you have. I'm Bill Staples. I'm president of the University of Houston Clear Lake. And to answer your question, the three primary areas that we would focus on initially would be business administration, education at both the bachelor's and master's level, and particularly the third area is psychology. And in other experiences we've had with off-campus programs, those tend to be three of the high demand areas. This is a public-public partnership, as Joe said. The city of Pearland approached the University of Houston Clear Lake. This is on city of Pearland owned property. If you're familiar with Houston, and I know board member Bricker is, there is what they call Loop 610, and then there's Beltway 8. This property is 1 mile south of Beltway 8.
And there's Midland, Odessa.
Or the Grand Parkway, isn't it? But,
Just keep going.
so there is very good access to it. Also, within close proximity, you have three community colleges. You have San Jacinto Community College District, you have Alvin Community College, and you have branches of Houston Community College, particularly their central campus. The University of Houston Clear Lake that I represent is one of the few remaining upper-level institutions. So we have every degree fully articulated with all the community colleges that make up the Gulf Coast Community College Consortium. This is a 20-year lease. It ends up being a lease purchase arrangement, but what happens at the end of the 20 years is that the building and the property come to the University of Houston Clear Lake, and the property includes up to 40 acres of land. I would never see this as being a freestanding campus. In other words, the home campus will always be UH Clear Lake. This will simply be a branch operation. Within a 10-mile radius of this location, the population is 600,000 people. And basically by 2011, that population is projected to increase another 9%, 8 to 9%. So we think working with the community colleges in the area, where they would take the first 2 years at those community colleges and then transfer to this site for the degree programs that we're talking about. The other part of the building, at least initially, will probably be the Pearland Economic Development Corporation, and they are considering asking San Jacinto College, which is one of the area community colleges, to bring in their small business development center in the part of the building that would be by the city of Pearland. What Joe was indicating, the initial building would be 30,000 square feet. We would have 20,000 square feet. The city of Pearland would have 10,000 square feet. If at any time the programs grew enough that we needed the other 10,000 square feet, we would simply let them know that, and with proper notice, they would exit that space and turn it over to us. So for us, this is a very good partnership. Our Board of Regents, the UH System Board of Regents, approved this on May 17th. The Pearland City Council approved the proposal on June 11th, and that's basically why we're here today. And I want to express my appreciation to Joe and Kevin and Roger for their assistance.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate your being here today.
We might ask you just to stay for just a second, since the next item on the agenda is your mission statement, which is a relatively minor change in terms of numbers of words, but maybe of some significance. Most of our mission statements, when we change them, it's more just a matter of changing style, but in your case, we're adding a recognition of a doctoral program.
Given your earlier discussion, I'll make this very brief. UH Clear Lake, with your approval, added a doctoral program in educational leadership, an EDD. It is obviously a very practice-oriented doctorate. The first class was admitted in January of this year. The second class will be, and these are cohort groups, the second class will be admitted this August, and then every August thereafter we will admit a class of doctoral students. It is important in relation to our master's program. At the University of Houston Clear Lake, in our master's in educational management, we presently have about 500 students. So we have one of the largest master's programs in educational management in the entire state. We definitely have the largest program in the Houston area. And so there is great demand for the doctorate in ed leadership, the EDD, and that is really the only change. That's our only doctorate.
And the other mission statement revision at Southwestern is really to reduce the number of words, get a little more concise. I don't know that we had Linda counting spaces on a page for them. Something similar.
Thank you, Dr. Staples. Item E.
Item E are the preliminary authority request. Chinese studies is like an obvious kind of a no-brainer, if you will, for a city the size of Houston to have a undergraduate program in Chinese studies. Brownsville, you see the label public service, think of that as public administration. That's the way the nomenclature fits.
Because I think most of the people that we know could like have an honorary PhD in public service. So I was like, I wonder what that is. Okay, public administration.
It's public administration. It's a broader category in the federal taxonomy. At Tyler, these are logical extensions of the programs that have been in place for a while to add master's levels in mass communications and in mechanical and electrical engineering. And that would bring us to item F, and it ties back then to Roger's presentation earlier. You will see there a very large number of requests for approvals of new doctoral programs, but you'll notice that they are really in many respects all practice oriented. The one that you could be in that gray area with as to whether it's a research degree or a practice applied research one is this new PhD in wind science and engineering. We believe that will be the first such degree program of this type in the nation. It builds on two very strong subspecialties in the atmospheric sciences program and the civil engineering program with strong research already in place. They've had a major National Science Foundation called IGERT grant to develop this as an interdisciplinary program. So that's the one that I would call particularly to your attention, because I think it is a sort of cutting edge kind of program, will be of great significance. The other one I would call your attention to is at Brownsville, the Doctor of Education in Curriculum and Instruction, and that's consistent with what we were talking about earlier about meeting regional needs. And this will be an applied program. It will focus on educational needs in the Valley, and much like the one you just heard about at Clear Lake, we'll work in a cohort model.
Now your comments, we'll say it will, these reviews are still underway. You don't anticipate any issues, but some issues could emerge when the reviews are completed. Is that correct?
Certainly true. In the next 30 days, they're on. So my comments are really based on what we know to date. These are always well-documented proposals, but when we send site teams out, we do learn some new things. If there are no questions, I think we can go on then to these rural issues, and Reinhold is still here if you have questions about the technology workforce rule, but those are minor administrative changes. The next one on the engineering recruitment is to implement legislation, and I don't believe there are any special issues in that distinguish it from the legislation itself. Am I correct? And then the next one is the course drop rule, and again, nothing much that distinguishes it from the legislation itself. I might comment that here it's not probably so much the rule as it's going to be the procedures that the institutions have to adopt to make this work. The student will no longer be able to drop more than 6 courses in their entire undergraduate career. As you know, a lot of students move around. They'll be at one institution and then at another, maybe back to the original, sometimes enrolled in 2 institutions simultaneously. It's particularly the problem where they're enrolled at 2 institutions simultaneously that it's going to be hard for the registrars to enforce this limitation on number of drops. And so they're going to have to work out ways that essentially hold the student themselves responsible. The consequences of dropping more than 6 courses is that somebody's going to have to record one of those as a failure rather than a drop, and then that affects GPA. And so procedural issues are yet to be resolved, but at least we'll have some emergency rules in place that will permit the institutions to work on those procedures.
Joe, did something occur to cause us to adopt? We're adopting it on an emergency basis. It's like that.
I'm sorry. This is yes, Senate Bill 2183. This last session. So, law that's gone into effect a couple weeks ago.
So we're just trying to catch up with the legislation.
Correct.
One legislator has had this on his agenda for a number of years, and some institutions are very concerned about how to handle this procedurally, and so this is sort of a low-key presentation. I don't think the institutions feel very low-key about it. So you may get some phone calls.
Yeah, okay. I have gotten quite a few phone calls, and it's a mind.
I haven't. Have y'all?
I haven't.
So,
well, they called y'all about the other things.
yeah.
Is this something that impacts community colleges more? Because those are the phone calls I've gotten.
Probably will. There's much more drop activity at the community colleges.
Then, as you look at whatever the emergency basis and how this Senate bill will now impact as law the universities, what kind of input are you getting from community college leadership and university leadership to help frame the implementation?
Most of what I'm hearing, at least, and we've got other staff here that have been more involved than I, it is much more procedural than anything we can deal with through rules. It is how are they going to record it on the transcripts, and how's it going to show, and even bigger problem is how are they going to keep track of things when students are enrolled in more than one institution and have multiple transcripts and haven't transferred all of that credit.
UT Austin has actually raised this issue while we were discussing another topic, that just the difficulty of within the institution, it's not hard to handle procedurally. They feel it's when you have students who transfer from one or more institutions and how to get that, develop that system internally so you can note that.
It seems to me that we also need to be concerned about communicating this to students and making sure that they know, if they drop 6 courses in their first couple of years, that they can't ever drop another one, and so that, to help them in their planning process. And it causes me, I have a daughter that's enrolling as a freshman out of state, but she's got her schedule, and she's already planning to drop a couple of things and drop add in order to just get her schedule straight.
You're absolutely right.
And I just wonder whether, if that were in Texas, how would that be treated?
You need to explain this because it would not affect her in terms of drop add.
So it's once you've started the course and you drop it, but not in
When
registration?
you get past the drop add date.
Uh-huh.
It's the drop after the drop add date that it
Okay.
is a problem. So
But it wouldn't only affect the student, doesn't it affect the institutions as far as how they look, as far as how many students have dropped courses? Does that affect their funding? Does that affect their, anything else?
If it affected their funding, we probably would have fewer drops. They're funded on the 12th class day essentially, and so after that, if a student drops at any time, that they still have the money.
where it will
The way the formula works.
Where it will affect it is directly through the formula. If fewer students drop, that also will mean fewer students probably register for some of those courses, and so they'll be a little more careful when they register. They'll have stronger intent to complete, which probably means they'll register for fewer hours, and that will affect funding.
Are the universities and community colleges, are the schools aware of the fact that you're looking at ways to implement this that would be less threatening to them? Maybe that's too strong of a word, but are they aware of the fact that you're looking at the wording and implementation?
I think they are aware that their registrars collectively are working on process. That's really not an area, though, that we can do anything more than facilitate.
So what's the legislation limited to? 6 drops?
The
Throughout
legislation.
your entire college career?
The legislation limits a student to no more than 6 courses that can be dropped in their entire undergraduate career.
I'm reading her mind. She's thinking of her kids.
I'm like, okay, I've got, what about a child that has health issues or?
There are accommodations.
There are provisions for excused
I mean,
drops.
because, we've got my famous child that's on the 7-year undergraduate plan.
Why don't you give examples of
Yeah,
your
so what about a kid like that?
What are the exceptions?
Kids like that.
There's a lot of kids like that.
A lot of the drops right now are just, they tend to be more convenience drops, and some of them, because grades aren't going real well, and maybe work schedule got a little bit out of kilter, those are the ones that are being blocked. And there will be provisions at each institution for exceptions. Health conditions are the big one, and there will also be provisions for dropping if the work schedule is changed and is beyond the control of the individual student, and that's being called up for military duty is clearly one of those that's an exception. So, the way the rule is currently drafted, it repeats the provisions that are in the statute, adds one for these work circumstances, and then permits the institution to establish other hardship criteria, but requires the institution to establish a procedure by which that judgment is made by the institution and not just by the student. That's the essence of the rule.
I can see why you've gotten phone calls. I'm kind of surprised we haven't. Yeah.
Well, part of what Joe is saying, that a culture has developed over the years. This is, a culture developed that students took fewer hours, that 12 hours became a full-time student.
Yeah, which
versus
is a
15
real
or
tradition
18.
since our day.
I've heard many anecdotes over the years of including some of the staff members talking about their brothers or sisters who had enrolled for 15 or 18 hours, then they would drop later and pick up some of the money that they were refunded in some cases if they didn't do it too soon. There are all kinds of things that are functioning out there that are just different than part of what we experienced, and so I think that there will be sort of a rough period for students. I think you're very right that we need to make sure, and we need to actually think, Joe, about I think most institutions will think about, but they all won't. How do they inform students and make it very clear that this is part of the policy, and not just leave it up to them to run into that barrier when it hits them the first time.
Yeah, they need to know as freshmen going in,
And even
maybe all these things have been thought of.
even existing students who have been at a school where they can drop right before the final, and so perhaps they haven't been studying, they suddenly realize that they've dropped so many courses, and gee, they better study for the final because maybe they can pull out a C, and if they otherwise are going to get an F.
Well, let me ask another question. Do they all start with a clean slate today, or does it include, like, if you dropped 3 classes last year?
Yes, it's retroactive to your.
No, it starts in fall, this coming fall.
For incoming freshmen?
Incoming freshmen.
So like if you're
So current students are grandfathered?
if you're a junior this fall,
Yeah.
it doesn't apply to you, or it only, or you?
Or begins with that junior year.
Right.
Yeah.
I wish Catherine were here to, just as the expert on this.
Honestly, there's a whole lot
We
of
don't have to get
questions.
into,
I
I assume somebody's going to get us.
We're not trying to micromanage, but
And
I'm just
also,
asking questions they're going to ask.
and also about dual credit, does it count for that since it's college? Because I would imagine there are a lot of drops there.
There's no exception for dual credit, and my recollection is that it applies only to those who enter as freshmen beginning this fall. So that, and that is an interesting question. If one is, say, a sophomore, they can still drop 20 courses, but if they're a freshman, they can only drop 6.
Yeah.
We'll take another look at that part.
But if dual credit also counts, if you're taking dual credit, which is college credit, you're technically a freshman.
Yeah.
Actually, you haven't been admitted under dual credit, and
Yeah.
I'm going to go back, and that's another one. We're going to take another look, I guess, as a lawyer, get a lawyer in there to look at it.
Well, that'll fix it.
We're playing stump the staff here.
That's right. We're doing a good job, aren't we?
Sounds like we're going to play stump the students real quick.
Thank you.
Foster raised a question of why now, why on the emergency status, and it is to get it on the agenda. May well have to be changed as we get some folks in here and really raise the kinds of questions you're raising this morning.
We look forward to more information on that, don't we?
Catherine is here now. Okay.
And the commissioner has a meeting with a senator.
Yes.
And has to leave. Thank you. We'll see you at the P16 conference. Thanks, Raymond. Hi.
Hi. A lot of questions about this.
Well, ask away, and I will try from memory to tell you what
This
I know.
question that Lisa we left with, does this only apply to students who are beginning this fall and those
Yes.
afterwards?
Yes.
So
So it won't be grandfathered in for students who are already enrolled.
a student who is already enrolled could continue to drop 20 classes from here forward?
Unless their institution has already instituted a policy that has a limitation on drops.
And the second question was, does this apply to dual credit, which would be students who are not yet admitted as freshmen?
I would think, because that's not addressed specifically in the statute, that would be up to us to interpret. And since dual credit doesn't really go on to the college transcript until the student actually enrolls in a college and claims that credit, I would think that would not be something we would choose to count.
Just, I could note that what might help support that is that from a reporting purpose, all those students are enrolled in college courses. We don't count them as a college student until they actually leave high school and set foot on a college campus. So we refer to them as
Funding.
first-time students once they actually graduate.
Right.
So the hours do count.
Right. And this would follow the student from a community college to a four-year institution, and that's part of the problem? Is that what you were saying, is how they track that? And
I have been in touch with the current president of TACRO. You all know what TACRO is? Texas Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. They have membership from every institution, public and private, in the state. Each state has a similar organization under the umbrella of the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. I've talked with the current president and the person who will be the incoming president in August. I've also talked with TACRO's legislative representative who's down at UT Austin. He's an associate registrar there. They're putting together a committee. Their executive committee met last Monday. They're putting together a committee to come and talk with us sometime in the next 10 days about some of the difficulties that community colleges are perceiving, and universities too for that matter. This is going to take some retooling of software, but they are committed to working with us to see that this is implemented appropriately at all public institutions, and they have expressed gratitude to the board through me for being included in the process. They're a very potent and competent organization, and they want to do the best thing that they can for students. So we hope to have that meeting within the next 10 days. They're on my call list this morning to rattle some cages.
Perhaps by a July board meeting, we need to have more.
Yeah.
We will have, yes.
And somebody probably already sent me a copy of this bill, but I don't recall it, so.
I can print
remember
copies
seeing
and get it
this.
to you within the next few minutes if that would be helpful to you.
Okay, that'd be great. Or just get it by
Just
email.
email it to us. That's good.
And just as an aside, since you have your finger on the pulse of the admissions officers, I'd like to know, and this is separate and apart from that, but I'd like to know their response to House Bill 3826 and that impact on the recommended curriculum. And I know that everybody's working on it, but I'd like to know at some point that they are involved.
I haven't polled them yet on that, and I'm not on their listserv, so we kind of want to stay out of the way of their work unless they call us. But we called them in this case. I think that Dr. Stafford is going to be invited to speak with them. They have a summer meeting that will happen the third week in July. I'm otherwise committed that week. I was invited to go and speak with them. The community college TACRO members meet for 2 days, and then the university TACRO members meet for 2 days, and I think probably Dr. Stafford will be invited to address.
Let me add to that, because the staff hasn't been directly involved in that. And there was a conference call yesterday with
And
very
for us who don't remember every number to every bill.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Lauren does, right? Please tell me y'all know. Which one is this, Lauren?
It's a secret.
Because y'all all know when we're going.
It requires for the 4-year university admission, the recommended high school diploma or its equivalent in schools that don't offer that, or a minimum SAT of 1,500 on the newly normed SAT, or the equivalent on the ACT.
And there are a couple of other, there's an exception for GET. There are several exceptions, and I think that's partly what hasn't been seen by the field, but it's a very hot issue right now, and Ms. Bricker's been part of that heat.
I've been
Thinking my fingers on the pulse.
She remembers the number.
But we had
Red.
an informal call yesterday. Glenda Barron, Susan Brown, Bill Friends, with David Anderson from TEA, he's their general counsel, with Susan Barnes, who's the associate commissioner for curricular type things, several of her staff, a counselor from Round Rock, because we wanted to sort of talk about the impact there. So there was a very informal conversation trying to get some feedback from various angles in terms of what it really meant, separating out sort of fact from fiction. And then from there, bring in a more of a formal group, but we wanted to have some of that information right now. Bill later had a phone call with an attorney from the Texas School Alliance, I believe it's called. And
David Thompson.
yes, and Raymond is meeting with the Texas School Alliance on the 25th. There's a lot of activity going on
There is.
revolving around this. There is a huge gap between the minimum diploma and the recommended high school program and the person entering their senior year. But the real issue would be if they're not on track to have the recommended high school
Do they have
program,
time?
it's hard to catch up on the foreign language.
Yeah. it is.
If they haven't done that, they require 2 years of foreign language.
The speech and the art.
Sorry?
The speech and the art, because if they're taking the extra year of math and science, they're not necessarily taking the others because that doesn't offer the extra grade point, and a lot of students will opt out in order to get in the top 10%.
Now, to let you know, there were 1,400 and I believe 8 students who enrolled at public universities last fall that did not have it. That's out of 40-some-odd thousand.
97.3%.
did. Only 8 students who were in the top 10% did not have anywhere in the state, did not have the recommended high school program. We had about, between the ACT and the SAT, another about 450 would have been exempted based upon the law as it exists, so that leaves, I'm not sure, about 900 students. So many of them would have fairly low SATs, and one of the messages is if you take the recommended high school program, you can overcome that
That's right.
SAT score. But part of it is a transition. About, depending on the school district, 75 to 80% of the students graduating from the schools have the recommended high school program. So we're trying to discover what the various issues are and if there's something that ought to be done in terms of first year transition, but we're having to learn really the public school problems in a way that there are band issues and there are athletic, there are all kinds of issues in terms of the way it's structured, so that if you take, say, choir for your whole high school career, that takes up X number of credits that could be used for something else. Same with certain athletics, or if you take math instead of PE, for example.
PE will bring your grade point average down because it's not the extra grade point. But school districts have the option of making their speech or art courses honors courses to give you the extra grade point, so that can be a local decision to encourage them for more students to have the recommended curriculum, which has been the default curriculum anyway. But the reason I brought it up, and I know it's off the subject, but more so than anything, I guess I just had an aha moment that if you are in communication with admission directors, that so much of what we talk about in all of our committees has to do with the impact of admission directors and how they see it as incoming students for participation, developmental ed. I mean, they're the ones that are on the front line, probably more than anybody else, seeing what kind of a pipeline we're creating, and with your committee too.
Admission directors are involved in committees across agencies. So Student Services has a number of committees in which, and most notably the Common Application Committee, which is essentially admission directors.
We had a brief email exchange that included Lois Hollis about that a couple of weeks ago, and she suggested that we use the Common App committees for feedback on this particular bill.
But it's really, actually, I'm glad you brought this up because it's something that you may all hear about. And a couple other things just so you'll know. Recall that the Texas grant requires the recommended high school program. The top 10% will now require the recommended high school program, though for all intents and purposes, everyone had it.
Yeah.
And Texas Grants has as well.
Yeah, Texas Grants has it. So there are a number of things that are coming together, and I think part of it is there may be some things we need to address, but we also need to address the schools better understanding the full picture of how this fits in, and there may be students who are missing some opportunities to have their help contribute to the cost of their higher ed because they're not in the recommended high school program, but they're eligible from an economic standpoint. So we need, and I don't think they understand all the exceptions as well.
Right.
The really good student who's taking that additional courses probably will score that 1,000.
Right, yeah, because the argument we heard was, well, the valedictorian of a very competitive school is not going to take the recommended curriculum because they want to take the extra math and science, and so the argument is, well, then they would have a 1,500 on the SAT, on the new SAT.
Yeah, and they'll probably have closer to 2,000.
Exactly.
Okay, if I could ask one more question before we leave this, on the drop issue, what about, because I asked the question about transferring from community colleges to universities, what about transfer from private institutions to public? Because if you go from public to private, then it's up to the private school what they do with theirs.
The law only
But if you go
applies to publics. So if you transfer from a private institution, those drops would not count under this law.
So you start over.
The law defines in the definitions where this would apply, and it applies only to the publics.
So also if you transferred from out of state,
Right, same deal. So once you come into the Texas public system, at whatever point you enter it, after fall of '07, whether you're an entering freshman or whether you come from Rice or Our Lady of the Lake or Incarnate Word or Sherman College, or whether you come from someplace out of state, it's when you matriculate at a Texas public institution, 2-year or 4-year, that this kicks in. After that, any courses you enroll within the public system, that's where it matters. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Any other questions in regard to this issue? I think next is Jay.
And that's just the routine report from David Couch's group on institutional compliance, the Perkins reviews. And then item 8, staff activities. The only thing I want to call to your attention is that you've been well cared for many years by Linda Ewan, and she's decided to retire.
Oh.
And leaving me a little bit nervous, but she's trained Cheryl Roswell, who's sitting beside her, to take over.
Sharon wasn't smiling at first. Did you notice? Like, no.
So we will continue to, Cheryl and I will try to keep things going as well as Linda has in the past.
So Linda, when is this
Bear
going to
with us.
take place?
August 31st.
August 31st. Well, good luck. You'll be missed. I'm leaving too then, so.
I was about to say, I
I'll
think
miss you.
we've also
You'll
been
miss
well
me, I
cared
know.
for.
Is that why
Our
you're
chairman.
retiring?
She's so sad.
We've also been well cared for by our chairman.
Oh,
And this
We
is her
have.
last
Thank you.
committee meeting as chairman, and so you'll be missed as well.
For sure.
Thank you.
But you can come visit anytime.
And I'll be the one calling y'all.
Watch us on the
Oh,
website.
yeah, you know me and my
Actually-
computer literacy issues.
Actually,
I'll bet that's happening.
Instead of their visiting us, I recommend we come visit her.
Absolutely. I hope so. I hope so. We're done.
We're done.
Aren't we? Yeah, and thank you, Paul, for mentioning that. This has been a real honor to chair this committee. It's sometimes a taxing and trying one, and we've learned a lot. I've gone through several different, did we leave something out, Linda?
I failed to introduce our newest staff member, Vanessa Davis. Dr. Davis?
Hi, Dr. Davis. Welcome. And what is your area of expertise?
I came to you from teaching. Recently spent 7 years at Houston Tillotson University as a historian and a civil rights historian specifically.
Oh,
So I'll be working with program review, and I'm also doing some work with distance education. And we come from a similar arena. I was born and bred in West Texas in
where are
Midland.
you? In Midland. Great. Well, we'll have to visit about that. Welcome. We're glad to have you here. Anybody else we need to recognize?
I don't
For
see
coming
anybody
or
else
going?
pointing or giving me hand signals. So.
The new vice chancellor.
Okay, great. Do we have anything else to discuss before we adjourn? Do we have a motion?
David reminds me that I should introduce Dr. Ashley, the new vice chancellor for academic affairs in the A&M system.
Oh, welcome. Glad you're here. All right, we have a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Thank you.